So I was checking out a debate on my favorite debate channel here on YouTube, the Crucible, and there are a lot of different topics discussed. Broadly speaking, men versus women, the workforce, economy. I don't remember half this shit because it was 4 hours long. But at one point, Andrew, who really doesn't like Destiny, said something really stupid, or at the very least, the way he framed it was maybe he meant something else, and just I think he gets triggered by Destiny and just wants to own them sometimes, quote unquote. The ego gets in the way, in my opinion, and he said something so asinine that I just had to correct him on. And it was mostly implied, I guess. I don't remember exactly what was said verbatim, but he seemed to imply that if women, well, first of all, he wants women to not work. What the fuck, dude? Right? He wants women out of the workforce completely. I mean, and it seems to be this like moral precept or the way things should be, because that's the morally correct way, or whatever have you, right? And he seemed to imply that if women were to leave the workforce immediately, right, and then what's to follow is explicit, he said this explicitly, men's pay would just skyrocket and the economy would be just fine. I mean, and then Destiny just lost his mind because it was such an asinine statement to make, right? You're just going to, half the people in the economy are just going to lose jobs, right? They're going to be taken out of the workforce. There aren't enough unemployed men to take their place. And in the short term, yeah, sure. A lot of men would make more money. I don't know that their pay would skyrocket, but there would be more of a demand, right? And they would make more money in the short term, but in the long term, the economy would collapse. It's not like we just, out of the goodness of our heart, and gave women these jobs that, you know, the economy doesn't need or whatever, or like men could just pick up the slack, right, of however many million women are working right now in the U.S. economy. If you were to take them out, men could just pick up the slack because they're so much better, right? Really? You're telling me it was just such an asinine statement. I don't even want to address it. And that's what Destiny stated, right? He said, you're not even wrong. This statement's so stupid, you're not even wrong, right? It's a non-starter, right? What he meant is that not that he's correct in what he's saying, but that it's so stupid that it's not even worthy of addressing. And he's correct. But when you point that out to Andrew, right, he'll just say, you're simping for Destiny, when his entire chat was simping for him. If we're going to be against simping, let's be against simping, right? If being good faith is something we're interested in, let's be good faith, right? If we're good Christians, right, and honesty is important, let's be honest. That was a stupid fucking statement to make. Now, maybe, again, maybe he needed to qualify it, right? But he didn't attempt to. He just, whatever. He was just rude and obnoxious. And happy to have people simp for him. And Charles Schill, 1906, was one of those people, right? He made a comment that I just felt like addressing. He says, the economy has 100% been benefited by women entering the workforce. Was something said, and it probably by Destiny, right? And he takes issue with the statement and says incorrect, because for every job that women replaced men at, and there's a lot to break down here, so we're gonna do it piece by piece. To say that women replaced men at these various jobs, I mean, can we have some examples, right? Can you give us some specific examples where women have replaced men? Could it be that because the economy was growing, right, and jobs were like estheticians, for example, right? Way back in the day where everybody was dirty. I'm exaggerating, right? But women worked in the fields and whatever. Do we even have these jobs before U.S. became very, very prosperous, right? You didn't have a lot of the same jobs you have today. And we could argue about how beneficial to society these jobs are, right? But that's not the point. We're just talking pragmatics here, right? Economy, what makes the world go round. Whatever that world is, well, sorry, or congratulations, I don't give a shit, right? So I would think that many different types of jobs, right, have been created since, and women have filled these roles. Or maybe things that women used to do for free or for one another in exchange for labor, right? Like, I don't know, women cut each other's hair, right? For example. Well, now you go and pay someone to do it for you, right? These jobs have been created, for example. So there's many more jobs which necessitated women entering the workforce, right? And that followed. So a lot of women entering the workforce, they weren't replacing any men. And even if there are fields where there are more women in these fields today than they were at some very short arbitrary point in history, that doesn't mean that that's the standard, that men did these jobs traditionally. That's not necessarily the standard traditionally, right? Just because it was so for a very, very, very short period in American history when U.S. was at its most prosperous at the cost of the rest of the world. Right? That's by no means a standard. So, like, people just blurt these fucking things out without really thinking about them or giving any evidence for these statements, right? And again, so to say that women replaced men in certain jobs, okay, examples, right? And it implies that men somehow lost these jobs, right? Men were taken out of the workforce. When, okay, evidence, right? To replace, could it be that there was just more of a demand for people, there were just more jobs in the economy, right? And women needed to enter the workforce without, by and large, I'm sure it's happened in to some degree. That's going to happen. But to say that for every woman who's entered the workforce, a man had to exit the workforce. I mean, just look at the sheer numbers. That doesn't make any fucking sense. So this broad statement that women replaced men, no. They supplemented. They've made they took the load off men in some of these fields. Maybe some of these fields just had more jobs to offer and not enough men to fill them. And new job fields were created also. Or they simply transformed from barter economy to a more corporate economy, right? Well, I'm not sure I'm using the right terms. I'm no economist, but unlike a lot of these trad tards, you know, I actually try to think about this shit before I, make these declarative statements. So assuredly too, right? Anyway, because for every job that women replace men at, they've needed twice as many women to do the same work as the men who had been replaced on average. Okay, can we see some evidence of this? We're just going to throw this shit out there. Do you have any numbers to support this? Right? So for every man or for every 2 women entering the economy, right, working today, you would think there should be 1 unemployed man out there, right? So half the men in the United States should be unemployed right now, right? This is what making these, am I getting this wrong? You guys let me know. This is what making these asinine statements implies. We're just gonna blurt the shit out like it makes fucking sense, right? Replaced. Example. Oh, I love this. Nursing, which was a male-dominated occupation. So, and these are like these trads, right? People who are supposedly macho men, believe in well-defined gender roles, right? There's certain things that are feminine, and there's things that are male. They're anti all this gender fluidity nonsense. These people, right? Nursing, which was a male-dominated occupation, says this right-wing woke tard, right? So women are naturally caretakers and caregivers. They're better at it than men, right? It's a feminine quality, which is why nursing was always, throughout the entire history of the world, and still is, dominated by women. And I looked this up just so I'm not talking out of my ass. In 1930, male nurses were about 1% of the nurses in the United States. And these days, right, with LGBTQ and gender fluidity and the destruction of gender roles, right? Men are being pushed into nursing, for example, right? Hairdressing and all this other girly shit, right? Male nurses are about 10% of the nursing workforce. So tenfold. By percentage-wise, by numbers, I mean, it's way, way more than that, right? So nursing, according to this guy, it's always a male-dominated. Like, where the fuck do you get this shit, right? And aren't you supposed to be a trad who believes in... I know I'm assuming a lot here, but this is the kind of pattern. If not this person specifically, one of the people thumbing this shit up or agreeing, nodding, right? When they hear or read some shit like this, they fit that description, right? These are the Andrew simps. These fucking retarded Redditors who never leave their grandma's basement or mama's basement. Right? Never... I don't know where they get this idea. Right? Nursing was a male-dominated occupation. Did you know that? Because it's such a manly thing to do. Because it requires physical strength to move dead weight of individuals around to simply just clean them, right? There's all these big, hulking men just tossing patients around, right? Requires physical strength. Well, maybe it also requires some gentleness, right? Some care, right? Maybe it requires people to be very careful when they deal with sick people who have all kinds of ailments and pains, right? Maybe it's better to not toss them around like a fucking Tarzan, but gently move them around. And guess what? Because we're intelligent beings, we have hoists and pulleys and other implements that women, weak women, and man, this idea that a woman isn't strong enough to move a sickly person around, right? Traditionally, I mean, these days when you have so many fucking fat asses, overweight people, then not even men can move them, right? But this idea that like you need these big Hulk nurses, I mean, for a trad, this person, well, I won't even go there. But his idea, let me put it to you this way, his idea of the world is closer to a gay porn flick than reality, right? What actually is happening, so, and God forbid, you know what I mean, a nurse here and there should ask another nurse to help her move a patient around, right? Let's say, theoretically, they have a room full of patients that, need to be cleaned or washed or whatever, and two of them go in there, right, and work on the patient together. That's going to be somehow less efficient than two men doing the same thing, right? Like, do these people even know what efficiency is? You know what I mean? So what if there's some few cases where you need two women to move a person? That doesn't mean that they're going to be any less efficient than two guys doing the same job. right? And on top of that, they'll do a better job. They'll make the patient suffer less because they're not going to be fucking just using brute strength. And again, there's, implements that we have, tools that we've always had to be able to move people around. And there's also such a thing as leverage and just knowing how. It's like there's this idea that, small women can ride big motorcycles because if they drop a big bike, they won't be able to lift them. And there's definitely truth to that, right? But if you use proper technique, leverage, then a tiny woman can ride a pretty big bike. Well, not as big as a big dude can, but a bigger bike than you'd think she'd be able to ride, right? Just using her fucking head instead of brute force ignorance. I mean, come on, man. Nursing was a male-dominated occupation. I mean, just absolutely asinine. Incorrect, right? When men occupy nursing positions, they almost never need to call in for other... Like, does this person actually have any experience with this? Have they ever seen any of this? We're just going to write these fantastical narratives because they sound good to us. Has this person worked in the nursing field to be able to make these statements? If they did, they'd be talking about that, right? It's just like, I'm just going to imagine shit and I'm going to talk like I know, right? They almost never need to call in for other nurses to help them move the patient. Because we're just tossing patients around in the hospital, right? But female nurses always require multiple, not just another, but multiple other people to help them accomplish the same task as a male nurse. So a man is as strong as at least 3 women. Just less video games, buddy, and more real world experience, right? It's like this in almost every single job field, by the way, right? Historically, he says, men occupied all jobs in the workforce, right? Nurses were men, doctors were men, caretakers, machine operators, assembly line, drivers, movers. Every job was done by men. Like, what fucking world does this person think existed? What world does he think he lives in, right? So, absolute asinine drivel, right? Men occupied all jobs. Women never work historically. What the fuck does that even mean? Now, yes, there was a very brief period of great affluence and prosperity in the United States where work became not ladylike to a degree. But this is generally upper middle class, high society kind of attitude, right? When people are very, very prosperous, right? Then they don't want women to work, to leave the home to do jobs, right? And it's seen as a sign of success, right? Where a man doesn't have to have his woman work as hard, or maybe not at all, right? Outside of the home. But women are always working, even if they're just working in the home. And if they're not, then they have fucking slaves or servants doing the shit for them. So yeah, and like maybe after the Second World War, right, where European economy was destroyed, and U.S. just prospered, right, by becoming a global hegemon, along with USSR. Yeah, men could afford to feed the family, buy a home, have 2 cars or whatever, just by themselves. Women didn't need to work, and they stayed at home for the most part and took care of children and so on and so forth, right? They didn't need to work outside of the home, but they still busted their asses, right? You put those women in the workforce, well, some woman's going to have to come into the home, or the kids are going to have to go to preschool, and somebody's going to have to take care of these kids, and it's going to be generally women anyway. So it's not like women just stop working. Like the nature of work and the nature of economies change, right? But women are always working. They're always doing some kind of job. And just this idea that like men occupied all jobs in the workforce historically. So what did women do? Just sit on their asses, breastfeed, and clean babies and stuff? Cook dinner? Really? Yeah, for a very, very, very short period of great prosperity in the United States, right? That was true for most people. Not black people, though. It's not funny, but this guy's a clown, right? And prior to that, right, when a lot of U.S. men went to war to bust their ass, well, a lot of female nurses went with them, right? Tons. And women worked in factories, right? They worked in the fields. They were all, a lot of women were helping in the war effort, right? And even prior to that, when U.S. was even poorer, right? Women always worked in the fields, factories. These people seem to, they just pick this arbitrary short period in history and they say, or arbitrarily decide to go back to that very, very short period of time in history because that's when things were most moral. That's generally how it's presented, right? That's when things were good. And they think, oh, society's been degenerated morally, and that's why things are bad now. No, that's not how it happens, actually. All these ideologies, feminism, socialism, whatever the have you isms, religions, right? Everything follows the buck, the dollar, the economy. The economy dictates what happens. So, for example, women weren't out of the workforce at one point in time in American history, and they weren't pushed back into the workforce at another point in time in American history because somebody thought that that was the moral thing to do. Women weren't... Well, let's go back to the beginning of the United States. Women, well, after, the men that came to the U.S., killed the Indians and made it safer for women to come. Then the women followed, right? They busted their fucking asses. Working the fields, right? Chopping down trees, skinning animals. Women did these jobs too, depending on how much money they had, right? If you were poor, you busted your ass. It didn't matter who you were, man or woman. And yeah, men were better able to do certain jobs, and women are better able to do other jobs. Like me, for example, right? Because of my bigger, swollen, beat up, calloused, right? Hammered into the ground, hands and fingers, right? Like it's very difficult for me to thread a needle. I can do it, but I'm not very efficient at it. It takes me a while. And then when it comes to like fine work that needs to be done that requires dexterity and someone who's more articulate with their... I suck at this shit, right? But that's work that needs to be done. Clothes need to be mended, right? Things of that nature. Clothes need to be made. Women are more efficient at that, always were. For example, right? Skinning an animal, right? Maybe once a man hoists it up for the woman, or two women do it. Women could be just as efficient at that as men, if not better at it, right? Because of dexterity and fine motor skills or whatever. Things of that nature, right? So when the economy demanded this, when people were poorer, right? Women did more work, more jobs, whether it's outside or inside of the home. Well, that dictates what society looks like, what economy looks like, what sort of life we lead as a society, right? Technology influences all that and so on and so forth, right? But it wasn't because, it was considered good or bad for women to work, morally speaking, right? It was necessary. Women needed to do those jobs. When U.S. became very, very affluent, right? It wasn't necessary for women to work. So then that became construed as the good thing, right? When economy first and foremost dictated that. And then when U.S. started to slowly, U.S.'s influence in the world started to wane, and U.S. economy started going down on average over a long, long period of time, right? It was once again necessary for women to slowly start entering the workforce in order to keep the economy going. And for whatever other reasons, right? Because other women wanted to go pay someone to do their nails or hair or whatever. Those jobs needed to be filled by women mostly, right? So because the economy necessitated it, right? In my opinion, right, I can't give you like the white papers or notes from all these conspiracy meetings where this was decided, right? But this is pretty clear to me anyway. Feminism became a thing. Yeah, a lot of the dupes on the ground were convinced that that's how people are brainwashed. That this is the moral thing to do. That's how you convince people on the ground to do your bidding. Ideology. You brainwash them with this shit, and all of a sudden they have a mission in life, a higher goal, and they pursue this thing because they truly believe in it, right? But the people above them pulling the strings are just like, shit, our economy's suffering. We need more workers. Where are we gonna get them from? Well, all these women ain't doing shit. Put them to work. Well, how do we convince them? Feminism, right? Now that we have all over the world, right? Demographics, crises. There's not enough babies being born on average in Western countries to replace the workers in the economy, right? All of a sudden, Roe v. Wade gets repealed, right? Because the farm owners need more livestock. So now we're going to push, this traditionalism and killing babies is wrong all of a sudden. And for a lot of people, it was always thus, don't get me wrong. But now this is being sold as a moral thing, right? A lot of people are being convinced that that's the moral thing to do, right? There's a big push for Christianity. I don't know if you've noticed. Even all this bitching and moaning and whining about how Christianity is suppressed or whatever. Well, I mean, maybe by some people, I suppose, but it's really being pushed right now, actually, right? And people are being, once again, brainwashed with ideology. Not because it's morally wrong. I believe it is, right, to just kill all these babies, but it's a pragmatic choice. And the way you convince people, you don't tell them like, oh, we need farm workers. You need to make essentially more slaves for us, right? People aren't going to go for that. So you all of a sudden allow them to have their Christianity, and you repeal Roe v. Wade because you need livestock on the fucking farm. So no, morality isn't dictated by economy, obviously, right? But economy is what, these pragmatic considerations is what dictates what people believe is moral. And sometimes it happens to align with what's actually moral, and sometimes not. So the reason why women have always been in the workforce, even though the workforce wasn't corporatized back then, right? That's a new phenomenon, corporations. Fairly new phenomenon. Let me put it to you this way. Because, I mean, the corporate world goes all the way back to ancient Rome, let's be real. But the sheer amount of corporations that exist today, right, is kind of a new thing. But women were always in the workforce, whether they were actually working for a corporate boss or not changed. But women were always busting their asses. And it was only like brief moments of great prosperity where they could relax because leisure time, right? That this wasn't thus. And now that economies are in a downturn right now globally, right? For a lot of different reasons, well, women need to bust their ass again, right? We need more workers. We need to make more babies, right? This is This is what makes the world go around, unfortunately. This is the reality of the world that we live in. So if you want to go back to a time of prosperity in the United States, right? Well, that's what you want to do, right? It has very little to do with what's moral, what's right, right? Because the way United States became prosperous wasn't very moral. It was off the back of millions of Europeans dying, right? And U.S. supplying them with arms. And helping to destroy European economy, right? I mean, they could have just let Hitler take over Europe, or as much of it as he could. And yeah, there'd be authoritarianism and people would be oppressed or whatever. Sure, but the economy would be thriving, probably. Maybe, right? Also, a lot of U.S. prosperity was built off the back of slaves. Let's just keep it real. That was part of it. And then, labor, capitalism in general, right? And especially something I talked about on this channel, the concept of private property and inheritance, right? The core of capitalism that most people don't seem to be aware of. Well, that's immoral, right? And you needed that in order to, first of all, gain this prosperity, and then at the same time you needed to also exploit some group of people, whether it was slaves at first, black, white, Native American, and then later on wage laborers, wage slaves, right? It was never about morality, first and foremost, right? Even those rich bitches in the 50s that didn't have to work, right? Well, who was taking care of their babies, right? Lower class, oftentimes black women, nurses, right? So even that is just a fucking fantasy that never existed. This idea that women were never in the work, it's just so asinine to say. You know what I mean? And so if you want to go back to that sort of prosperity, well, you need to realize how that was achieved in the first place, right? Well, war, right? Destruction of other people's livelihoods in other places. Sorry, that's what it is, right? So if you want to go back to that time, how are you at the same time pro-Russia, right? Because unfortunately, right, and a lot of these trettards they're so fucking incoherent. That's why I call them right-wing wokes. For example, a bit of a tangent, right? If I hadn't already said it, these people are anti-gender fluidity, right? But they want all men to be nurses, to nurses be just men, to fill in these traditionally feminine positions. So are you pro or anti-gender fluidity? Well, you don't fucking know. You're retarded, right? They want the United States to go back to its former glory, which had everything to do with U.S. being a global hegemon. And now that you have the left in the United States mostly, and a lot of people on the right, because that's one thing that they could unite on, because they know what it is, that it needs to be done if you want to maintain U.S. prosperity to some degree, or maybe try to go back to its heyday. You have to fight these wars, right? You have to turn back other contenders to global hegemony, right? You have to bring down these other would-be hegemons like Russia, China. You have to control them, right? This is unfortunately the world that we live in. The more power and prosperity and ill-gotten gains Russia and China get, the less resources there will be available for the United States, right? If the U.S. fleet, the strongest military on the planet, cannot control these trade routes, enforce embargoes all over the world, right? Contain China, whatever the hell you want to say, right? Take control or help their allies take control of the Black Sea. I mean, look at what's happening with Ukrainian grain, right? Oil, like it's all about controlling trade routes, economic sanctions, right? Destroying other countries' economy so that your economy can prosper. This is the sad fucking reality of the world. And this imagining, right, that we could just magically go back to a time of prosperity if we just kick women out of the workforce in the United States, right? Which is kind of what Andrew is pushing. And he's not that dumb, right? Thinking that he's working backwards. He doesn't know doesn't seem to know anyway, the true causes of the effects on the ground, where these things come from, how it is that these things exist. He seems to think that feminism was just this evil, satanic force that was created to degenerate society, and if we could just be a little bit more moral, right, then we would just go back to a time of prosperity magically, right? That's a profound misunderstanding of how the world works, globalism, profound misunderstanding of basic global economic forces. It's just this like rank ignorance of how things work. If we could just be a little bit more moral with regards to this like arbitrary morality that I have no justification for, or if I do, it's completely subjective, right? Because women have always worked, and maybe they should, right? This idea that like men need to bust their ass and women need to have it easier somehow, like that's, I mean, there's pros and cons to egalitarianism, right? And whatever that is, however you want to define it, right? It's just for things to be fair, right? But this idea that we could just kick women out of the workforce and everything's going to be hunky-dory, it's like, that's not how the world works, unfortunately. You know what I mean? It's just not how it works. So to think, to propose these things as just solutions is to be completely ignorant of all the underlying conditions that make the world what it is. And then to justify these asinine assumptions, you have to say some dumb shit like this guy, right? Historically, men occupied all jobs in the workforce. Nurses were men, guys. What? Nursing, the field of medicine, if we take all of the world's history, right, has always been, nursing for sure, has always been dominated by women. And the medical field, I don't know what it was, but, well, women are the caregivers, right? Men didn't fucking touch women. They didn't want to deal with females' issues historically. It wasn't up until corporate medicine where women doctors, right? Well, they didn't have diplomas. They weren't called that, right? They were called witches, and they were burnt at the stake, right? They were kicked out when medicine was corporatized. They were kicked out of the field, right? And, well, all the records were burned. Their books or whatever they had were destroyed. The knowledge is gone, right? And we went from healing people with herbs, good living habits, and other holistic, I don't know if more natural medicines, to this corporatized chemical pharmaceutical industry, right? The healers, the true healers, had to be gotten rid of. They had to be labeled as witches because they had knowledge. They were Gnostics. They had knowledge of how to do shit. And the reason they were able to keep their jobs is because they were fucking effective. They were good at it because women are naturally caretakers. And maybe the field of medicine should be dominated by women, however corporate you want to make it, because that would probably yield better results. Because when men started entering these traditionally female fields like midwifery, right, all of a sudden the birth rate, well, babies were dying a lot more because they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They had to learn, right? And then their pharmaceuticals and antibiotics and all this shit came to the rescue. Because they were, well, not clean. They didn't fucking know to wash their hands before they handled babies or whatever. They had to learn this shit that the witches fucking knew to do. But unfortunately, anyway, I'm done fucking ranting about this shit. It's so fucking asinine. These people have no idea, and I'm no expert either, you know what I mean? But before I fucking speak, I think about these things, and I do a little bit, tiny bit of research, right? Anyway, yeah, medicine became corporate when the true natural caretakers were kicked out of the field, burned at the fucking stake if need be. And could it be, right? Could it just be, I don't know, that hospitals have become essentially morgues, right? That the medical field has been great at fucking killing people. And maybe someone at some point realized that we need to push more women into the fields because they're actually better at taking care of people. Fucking naturally. You know what I mean? Because it's how God created them. Maybe? I don't know. It's just a thought, man. Anyway. The world is fucked up. There's no doubt about it. But it's not why these right-wing woke trad-tards think, and it's definitely not why the left-wing wokes, how they explain it either. The truth, I know, as corny as that fucking sound, as cliches as it fucking sounds, is probably somewhere in the fucking middle, right? Probably somewhere in the fucking middle, right? There's about, right? The world is made up of 50% men and 50% women. Maybe that should, to some degree, help dictate participation in everything, since we're about 50-50. Maybe, I'm not saying all the way across the board all the time, everything should be 50-50. But maybe it should be a pretty good rule of thumb, right? Yeah, there's things that men are better at doing, let them. But then there's also things that women are better at doing, so let them. And in the grand scheme of things, maybe we could be more or less 50-50 insofar as this workforce is concerned. However it looks, however the shape or the look or the existence of which, however it's dictated by progress and technology and knowledge and things of that nature, at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, it probably should be 50-50, right? Because the groundwork, right, for the world in society is more or less 50-50, I hope you get my point. I'm not the most eloquent speaker out there, but I try. Anyway, so Andrew, and I doubt he's listening, but I know some of you check out the channel, and maybe instead of, and I'm not saying you are, but, maybe you could combat, instead of simping if you are, or to combat a lot of the simping that goes on this channel, maybe we could all do better and correct when even the people we mostly agree with, and I certainly do, say fucking dumb shit. Because, they're mad at the left, or they're triggered, or they haven't taken the time to think about the shit that they say, and then they just end up being exactly that which they criticize the other side of being, right? Pro-LGBT or gender fluidity, as this fucking confused right-wing woke, bad faith, and simps, right? If we're against that, let's be all the way 100 against that, you know what I mean? That's all I gotta say, man. The Crucible, no doubt about it, the best debate channel here in YouTube, and I have very, very little beef with what that channel pushes, but they don't always get it either, you know what I mean? They don't always get it either. They're a little bit woke in some of their beliefs, and just completely fucking wrong, and they say dumb shit. A lot less than the retarded left, but they still do it. That's all I gotta say, man. Thanks for watching.